Welcome, everyone. It is 6 o'clock, and so we'd like to get ourselves started. We've got a lot of content to go through. So welcome to the second Stakeholder Forum from the Sacramento Regional Water Bank. Thank you for joining us this evening. We're looking forward to a productive and lively discussion with you all. I'm Vanessa Nishikawa with Stantec, and I'm part of the Water Bank development team, and I'll be helping facilitate this forum tonight. Tonight, you heard from several folks. Jim Piper, Executive Director of the Regional Water Authority, Ryan Ojakian, Legislative and Regulatory Affairs Manager at RWA, and Trevor Joseph, RWA's Manager of Technical Services. And the entire Water Bank development team is here as well. Before we dive into content, I just want to remind folks of a few of the ground rules. First of all, participation. If you have a question or comment, use the Q&A box. Conversational courtesy. Don't interrupt each other, use appropriate language, and avoid side conversations. Humor is welcome, but should never be at someone else's expense. And reminder that this is a remote meeting. If you're having technical difficulties, email at the club. And with that, I will turn it over to Jim.
Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you very much. Welcome everyone tonight. Welcome to our second stakeholder meeting. We had one a few months ago. Very helpful. We got a lot of good information from that, better understanding of what was on people's minds, and that is helping us out with tonight's meeting. So I'd like to introduce you to the Regional Water Authority. We are a joint powers authority of 22 water agencies within the greater Sacramento Sacramento region. And our mission is to serve, represent, and align the interest of regional water providers and stakeholders for the purpose of improving water supply reliability, availability, quality, and affordability. The Sacramento Regional Water Bank is one of those items that might fit within that mission. Next slide, please. So tonight's agenda, we will recap Stakeholder Forum 1. We'll talk a little bit about the water bank, some of the elements to that. And then the highlight of the evening is we will talk about the draft water bank goal, objectives, principles, and constraints. We'll have a presentation on that and a discussion. After that, we will discuss briefly next steps and wrap up the meeting and adjourn by 8 o'clock, maybe earlier. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Trevor Joseph. Trevor.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. So we'd start out by discussing and identifying the relevant entities that are involved in developing the water bank and involved in providing input to the water bank. Again, as Jim mentioned, the Regional Water Authority, the organization that Jim, Ryan, and myself work for, we have the honor of leading and coordinating the water bank development effort on behalf of our member agencies. Our member agencies are actually organized in what's called a water bank programming committee, and they provide funding, guidance, and direction to us and on this project. There are external water banking partners that we engaged. These are external entities to RWA with which we engage on behalf of our partnering agencies. We have state and federal agencies that we've been involved with in working through the water bank development. As the name implies, these agencies include those that are Department of Water Resources, the State Water Board, and U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, excuse me. And these agencies either have a regulatory, permitting, and or funding role with the water bank. And then finally, of course, there are stakeholders, non-government organizations, other entities, and individuals with interest in the water bank. And I know we have a lot of stakeholders on this call, and your input is very important to developing this bank. If you were with us during the last Stakeholder Forum, we had a slide that laid out the stages of water bank development. You can see that slide here. We worked in this region for more than 20 years on conjunctive use. And again, Ryan will kind of introduce this term again, conjunctive use, and cover some water banking terminology in the 101 section of this presentation. But this slide really lays out the major activities that we need to accomplish in order to complete this water bank effort. We group these really into kind of 3 stages: conceptualizing, defining and evaluating, and ultimately formalizing. And what that means is by 2024, within the year 2024, we're working to be a federally recognized water bank. We have major activities, communication and outreach. Obviously, the Stakeholder Forum addresses that goal, along with other stakeholder activities that we're working on. And again, I'll explain those in a minute. Engagement with potential partners and interest. And again, I kind of defined who those were, or those terms on the previous slide. That includes federal, state, and external entities. Project scoping and description, and really the presentation I'll be giving later on the proposed goal, objectives, principles, and constraints really fits into that category. Is very foundational in terms of how we develop the rest of the work with the water bank. And we'll explain that further. We're improving technical tools so we can evaluate the effects of the water bank. We ultimately will be working on governance and institutional constructs to implement the water bank. Those items in gray, we haven't started to work internally on it as our team yet on those items, preliminary and refining alternatives, and ultimately meeting the requirements of the CEQA and NEPA environmental documentation needed to define the water bank. That happens later in this development process. All right, so transition slide, we're going to get into a little quick recap of the Stakeholder Forum number 1. I think we had this meeting on October 26th, I believe, last fall. We've, at that time, gave an overview of climate change, really focusing on a study called the American River Basin Study that laid out potential effects of climate change on our region and has identified, among other measures, the water bank as one of the potential solutions to address those climate change impacts and make more water available to our region. We touched on the fundamentals of conjunctive use, really at its core, what makes the water bank functional. And Ryan's going to cover part of that again in his Water Banking 101 section today. So if you work with us, he'll kind of cover some of those fundamental elements that, again, make the water bank work. And then we gave an overview of a kind of a preliminary analysis related to the water bank that's kind of led to this work called the Regional Water Reliability Plan that was completed in 2019. And it kind of set the framework for really now moving forward with the water bank. And so we discussed some of those details during the last Stakeholder Forum. We also received a lot of questions during that Stakeholder Forum. We did the best to answer those questions during the at the end of the presentation. A lot of those questions we simply couldn't answer in the amount of time that we had. And we started a few weeks back what we call questions of the week, where we have 1 or 2, sometimes 3 questions that you provided us, or those that were on the Stakeholder Forum number 1 participants. And we work to answer those questions to the best of our ability and post those on our website. More on that later, and I'll show you where that can be found. And so hopefully just another opportunity to try to address questions and provide input between these stakeholder forums and future stakeholder forums. And we made some additional changes and updated our website for this project. And again, more on that later. We can provide to that information. All right, well, I'm going to turn it over to Ryan, and he's going to take us through a series of slides that we call Water Bank 101.
Thank you, Trevor. Double checking everybody can hear this. Got a little notification there on my computer, which I wasn't expecting as soon as I started talking. Since no one's speaking up, I'm assuming everybody can hear me. Yes, thanks, Trevor, for that introduction. I'm going to cover some basics here of how water banking works. And the purpose of this is really to give all of you a foundation as we go into the conversations that Trevor's going to frame up here on the goals, objectives, principles, and constraints. And so this is intended to give you, again, a foundation here to carry into that conversation. And so that you can understand how we can develop a program that will be water banking here in this region. If you could, next slide, thank you. So really at its core, water banking is conjunctive use is at the core of the principle of water banking. So what is conjunctive use? Conjunctive use is the planned use of both surface water and groundwater, depending on the conditions, so that you can enhance the long-term reliability of water in a region. So really, what you need to understand here is that when conditions are wet, you're using more surface water, and when conditions are dry, you're using more groundwater. Conjunctive use only works if you're doing both of those things. So it's not one action independent from the other, but it's doing both. So more surface water when it's wet, and then shifting over to groundwater when it's dry. Next slide, please. So how do you actually get water into the ground? I'm going to run through a couple of ways in which that is possible. So the first thing that I'd like to cover here is direct recharge. So there's a couple of ways that you can do direct recharge. One is through what's called a spreading ground. So you essentially locate a place where the water can penetrate into the ground, percolate into the ground easily, and you spread water over that area, surface area, and allow the water to then make its way into the groundwater basin. The second way in which you can do direct recharge is by using what's called aquifer storage and recovery wells, or ASR wells. And so those are wells that you actually can directly inject water into the ground. ASR wells also function on the recovery side, which we will get into in a little bit. Next slide, please. So there's also another way in which you can do recharge, and it's called in lieu, which is the predominant way in which we do recharge here in the Sacramento area. So what is in lieu recharge? So this is really when conditions are wet, you stop pumping groundwater and you again shift over to that surface water, and the natural hydrology actually allows the groundwater basin to fill up. And again, you shift over to groundwater when it's dry. But the key point here is that in lieu actually takes advantage of the natural hydrology and is a way in which you are allowing the groundwater basin to function as if it would had there been very little or no human intervention. Next slide, please. So what do we do for water banking? When during wet conditions, we take one of those recharge actions. So we either do in lieu recharge, which again is the predominant way in which we do recharge here locally, or you can do direct recharge, such as with ASR wells. So why are you doing that? It's really to increase your groundwater levels. So you're putting water aside when it's wet in the groundwater basin, and allowing the groundwater table to come up. Next slide. So then if you have taken that action, you can recover water in dry conditions. So you recover a portion of that water, making sure that you are sustainably managing the basin, and you can then allows you to forego surface water diversions in those dry conditions, which then allows you to leave that precious surface water for other potential beneficial uses. Next slide, please. So this is a slide that we put up in the first stakeholder forum, and we wanted to come back to this because I think this is really key. When we're talking about water banking, it is not occurring just solely based on whatever we decide out of the stakeholder forum in the project description. It is occurring with a backdrop of regulatory and other commitment requirements. The Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, very importantly, will apply to the operations of the regional water bank. CEQA and NEPA, as we discussed earlier, will apply. Other water board and reclamation policies will apply. And then the members of the water bank are also members of the water forum agreement, and they will make good on the commitments in the water forum agreement. And so, I mean, I think that that's really important, right? So it's conjunctive use designed by a HUS, but then checked by a variety of other regulatory and commitments that have been made. With that, that concludes my portion.
Great. So the next section here, really kind of the section with the most content tonight is our proposed goal, objective, principles, and constraints presentation. And I think you're about to get a poll that prompts you, if you're interested in submitting comments to us tonight on this section. I think it's a yes/no poll, and we'll give it a few seconds to pop up and let folks engage. This will help us get a sense of how many questions we're going to receive potentially and plan for tonight's remaining presentation. Okay, I think I saw it pop up. Looks like a pretty simple poll. So we'll move on to the next slide and get going. All right, there it is. Okay, so the proposed goal, objective, principles, and constraints. What you see here is, this is actually a screen capture on the right of a few-page document. It's not too long, that lays out our proposed goals, objective, principles, constraint, as you'll see them tonight, actually verbatim. The document, like I mentioned, is pretty brief, and we're looking for comments on this document. So why is the goals, objectives, principles, constraints so important to us, and why are we looking for your input tonight? And it really is, it establishes the project. It provides us a lot of guidance on how we approach developing the bank. Doing all the work that you saw on those stages earlier tonight is really dependent on understanding how we set up the bank. So this is a very much a foundational element, as I mentioned, and we really want to receive input on what we think are important elements in goals, objectives, and principles and constraints for operating the bank. And I also want to mention that, you know, we developed these based on already a lot of input we received during the Stakeholder Forum #1, in other discussions we've had with stakeholders, whether it was kind of one-on-one or through our program committee, through our member agencies. So this really already reflects what we feel are important, again, goals, objectives, and principles, constraints based on your input. Next slide. All right, so we'll start with goals. This is, again, the overarching, as the name implies, important element of how we look at the bank. And we want to really just define these terms before we even describe what we feel is the goal of this project. So a goal represents the desired end state of activities. The goal captures the intent, the why of the water bank, and serves as the foundation of the entire development and implementation process. Objectives represent current and best intent to address various aspects of the region's water management issues to maximize it to the extent possible, to the maximum extent possible, I should say. Objectives provide additional details on how the goal will be achieved and serve as means of measuring success in achieving that goal. And I think it's important to understand objectives are measurable. So we really want to make sure that we're developing objectives that we can look back and make sure that we've measured and met. Principles. We have a lot of principles tonight, many slides. They're overarching statements on shared values for the water bank, development and implementation, and they serve as the basis for decision-making. They are foundational, provide overall guidance project development and implementation. And then finally, constraints are factors that shape or limit the water bank in terms of how it is developed, evaluated, and implemented. And again, these terms probably even make more sense as we go through our proposed. All right, so the goal, and this is not two goals, it's one goal with two parts, if you will. We think of this goal as a whole and needs to be, both these parts need to be met. So the goal, as we laid out for the water bank, proposed goal is to expand conjunctive use throughout the region to improve long-term regional reliability and provide statewide water supply opportunities when possible and support healthy ecosystem function on the lower American River. And again, tonight, I should have mentioned, we're really looking for comments ultimately, if you have questions on the clarity and understanding of these goals, objectives, principles, and constraints. We want to make sure we're informing whether you provide us verbal comments tonight or written comments later, that we're providing a solid overview so that you can do your work and give us that input. I apologize, I should have mentioned that 2 slides ago. So objectives, I think we have 10 objectives. Our first objective is to increase groundwater recharge during wet conditions using available surface and recycled water supplies. Objective 2, reduce reliance on surface water during dry conditions by using previously banked groundwater. Objective 3, contribute to water reliability. Contribute to water reliability of water agencies in the region with no or limited access to groundwater. And kind of conversely, 4 is the opposite. Contribute to water reliability of water agencies in the region with no or limited access to surface water. Again, we have agencies obviously that fit in both those categories in our region. 5th goal, maintain the quality of surface water and groundwater. 6th objective, I should say, contribute to the Central Valley Project operational flexibility by reducing reliance on Folsom Reservoir during dry conditions. Objective 7, contribute to healthy ecosystem function, including on the lower American River. Objective 8, consider and advance mutual beneficial opportunities to partner with entities outside the region on operational collaboration and/or investment in the water bank. Objective 9, generate revenue for investment in infrastructure, other projects, programs to improve regional water reliability, resiliency, and affordability for participating agencies. And finally, objective 10, to generate revenue to reduce financial barriers to conjunctive use for participating agencies. So we did post the document earlier this evening, is that right? And so I know we're providing a lot of content very quickly. If you wanted to go on our website, you can certainly track and bring up that document and have it there. We're working through this. I apologize, should have mentioned that.
And we can add a link to that in the chat for folks so that they can easily access both the slides and the document.
Appreciate that. Yeah, thank you. All right, we're going to move to principles. There's actually 7 groupings of principles. Those groupings are regional water management, water bank development and operations, environmental stewardship, relationship to the Central Valley Project, public engagement, banking partner, participant success factors, and third-party success factors. I feel like I'm introducing categories on Jeopardy or something. So, all right, regional water management. Principles related to regional water management. Contribute to long-term sustainability of the region's groundwater basins by committing a portion of recharge to basin sustainability. Operate consistent with pertinent groundwater sustainability plans to ensure basin sustainability. And groundwater sustainability plans, for those of you unfamiliar with that term, is really what Ryan referenced on his last slide related to the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. We have to operate consistent with the plans that have been identified through the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. Maximize beneficial use of surface water in the basin. Contribute to meeting current and future water resource needs in the region. Maintain and improve water supply reliability in the region. So environmental stewardship, the principles are identify and avoid negative effects on environmentally sensitive areas in compliance with governing groundwater sustainability plans, such as the Lower American River and Sumnes River. And then finally, provide for ecosystem benefit from water bank operations. And again, you'll see some overlap between our objectives and even our goal, but it's important to also relate these as principles throughout our document here. So public engagement. Engage transparently with stakeholders during the water bank development and implementation process to promote dialogue, understand their concerns, and improve the process. Coordinate with other efforts and entities in the region interested in the water bank and water supply reliability. Build community awareness and encourage participation in stewardship of water resources, recognizing water as a public trust asset. Consider beneficial uses and users of groundwater, including domestic well owners, agricultural water users, and the environment. Provide education on the public benefits of water bank operations and transfer activities. All right, next category on principles, water bank development and operations. Operate as a single water bank that covers both the North and South American subbasins, as several local water agencies overlie both subbasins, and to recognize the existing interconnectivity of local water agencies across the subbasins. And real quick here, and this was partially covered in Stakeholder Forum number 1, where we talked a little bit about the North and South American subbasins. The greater Sacramento area, urban area, really overlies a portion of 2 different groundwater subbasins. And so it's important that we coordinate with both those subbasins and operate as a single bank. Conduct recharge actions before recovery actions. Conduct water banking operations consistent with relevant statutory and regulatory obligations. And again, Brian kind of touched on that in this last slide. Recover no more than the net bank water in the basin. Adaptively manage the water bank in compliance with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. Operate in compliance with governing groundwater sustainability plans. Relationship to the Central Valley Project. And there's a series of sub-bullets under this single bullet here. Operate the water bank consistent with the following tenets related to the Central Valley Project. The water bank is locally managed and operated, is not a Central Valley Project facility. For any Central Valley Project water used in the bank, reclamation, that being the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation's control and ownership of CBP water stops at the contractor's delivery points. The Central Valley Project water is stored in the water bank. It is delivered Central Valley Project water under the contractor's control. Use of Central Valley Project water in the water bank is consistent with the authorized beneficial uses and places of use of Reclamation's water rights as authorized through Central Valley Project contracts. I think we have another slide that continues this list here under relationship. Here it is. In addition, water bank operations do not affect or require modification the USBR's water rights. Although the water bank may provide CBP operational flexibility benefits, water bank operations are not considered integrated into CBP operations and are therefore not subject to inclusion in the Endangered Species Act Endangered Species Act consultation for long-term CBP state water project operations. The water bank does not impose new restrictions on the use of CBP water by local water agencies beyond those in their respective CBP contracts. Explore potential partnerships with Reclamation for the benefit of the CBP. So, a lot of these are just to provide even clarity on the roles and responsibilities related between the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, who operates the Central Valley Project, and those that will operate the water bank, which are actually the program committee or the RWA member agencies So we just wanted to provide a lot of clarity on that role with these last two series of principles. Under the banking partner participant success factor principle list, we have improve long-term water security, reliability, and resiliency in the region, create return on investment and reliable funding stream for long-term agreements, identify and meet local water agencies' regional water reliability needs first. And again, you kind of saw that probably in the goal statement. Related to that principle. Secure agreement on potential water transfer partners in terms of their water use and location. Provide opportunities for all local water agencies to participate in the bank. Maintain transparency of water bank operations and finances. Maintain individual RWA member agency autonomy. Seek external sources of funding and financial assistance for water bank development and implementation. Finally, I believe under third-party success factors, we have implement the water bank with no new restrictions on use of groundwater. Maintain consistency, again, with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act implementation. Safeguard groundwater quality. Prevent negative effects on the Lower American River area, Sumnes River area, or other groundwater dependent ecosystems. Prevent negative effects on or from related Folsom Reservoir operations. That's the end of our principle list. We have fewer constraints, but they're organized in these groups here: physical, operational, regulatory, institutional, and financial. So under physical and operational, constraints are consider capacities and limitations of infrastructure in both near-term and long-term operations. Structure operations in recognition of known groundwater contamination plumes and consider additional treatment needs. Our institutional constraints: maintain consistency with policies and agreements, contracts, and other guidelines of local water agencies. Maintain consistency with related local and regional efforts, including the Water Forum Agreement. Financial: secure financial resources for participating agencies to pay for infrastructure necessary to support water banking operations. And integrate funding mechanisms with fiscal requirements of participating agencies. I think this is the last slide on constraints. Regulatory: maintain compliance with existing regulations and requirements, including those related to the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, including adopted groundwater sustainability plans, groundwater sustainable agencies in the region. Those are those that implement those plans. And California Environmental Quality Act and National Environmental Policy Act, again, CEQA and NEPA, and State Water Resources Control Board and the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation policies, including water banking and water transfer guidelines. Maintain compliance with new and emerging regulations and requirements, such as changing water quality requirements. Recognize fluoridation practices and preferences in banking operations. Recognize and avoid infringing on existing uses of surface water and groundwater by private users and local water agencies. And that is an exhaustive list of goals, objectives, principles, and constraints. And our goal here, again, is to have you provide either verbal input tonight. I know we went through those relatively quickly. We'll take comments and have the ability to kind of go back and make sure that you have some clarity on what was presented tonight. But we really are interested in, frankly, your written comments are preferable. We have a public comment period that starts tonight and ends on February 22nd. And here, we'd really like you to format and send your comments by using the document that includes all of the goals, principles, objectives, and constraints, and organize your comments, hopefully in chronological order as they're presented in that document. and include some information here so that we can kind of quickly see those when they are submitted through our water bank info at rwah2o.org website. So that I'll close out this section of the presentation, and maybe we can stop here and seek input from the chat.
Yes, we've received quite a few questions and comments in the chat, and some of them have been already answered in the webinar chat by the water bank development team that's in the room. But there's other ones that have come in that we'll pose to the group, and some of them are things that we can answer now. Some of them are things that are going to be developed as we go. But folks, think about any kind of, like Trevor said, there's been a lot of information presented today. We would like you to provide your feedback on the goal, principles, objectives, and constraints. But today we're hoping to get any clarifying questions and anything like that that would help you provide your feedback and give you more information to be able to do so. But let me start going through some of the questions and comments that we've received at this point. And the first one is from an anonymous attendee. The question is, the RWA members are names, as are the agencies. Please tell us who the water bank external partners are. And this refers to an earlier part in the presentation.
Yeah, good question. And external partners, as we defined it, are essentially agencies or nonprofits or others outside of our region who are interested in participating and potentially receiving even water through the bank or a supply through the bank. And we wanted to be very clear again, through the principles and goals and objectives in terms of how that process might take shape. There have been agencies that our technical team has talked to that are outside of the region: Santa Clara Valley Water, Metropolitan Water District, I believe East Bay Mud. There might be others who have just frankly expressed interest at this point in understanding how the water bank is going to work, when it's going to potentially be up and running. So there are interested parties that are external to this region that have contacted us.
But no partners have been defined as yet.
No partners have been defined as of yet. And the Regional Water Authority, we're just working through the technical development and assisting with this process. Ultimately, any relationship between external partners would be established with actually the agencies that will operate the bank, which are the RWA member agencies involved in making the bank operational.
There's some questions and comments posted in the chat about how many attendees and who's participating. And I believe the names of folks that have been logging on to the Zoom webinar are being posted in the chat. So you should have access to all of that. There was also a comment from Barbara Leroy about, I hope to see what was being asked by the wide variety of participants. As I understand it, not all questions were addressed last time, but it was not known what the questions were and whether or not all individuals were fully included. From a public participation viewpoint, it is important that the stakeholder have transparency. Tim, did you want to comment on that?
I'm trying to recall. I think we asked and answered nearly every question that was asked. Barbara, I hope that addresses your concern. And we also want to conduct this with a high degree of transparency. So we're going to try to go through all the questions tonight. Thanks, Vanessa.
Great. The next question is from an anonymous attendee, and this is probably something that Trevor can answer. The question is water treated before ASR? Is PFAS removed?
Yeah, great question. Really, there's two agencies that have been actively working on aquifer storage and recovery in the greater Sacramento region: the city of Roseville and the city of Woodland, city of Woodland. The city of Roseville is a participating agency in the water bank. The city of Woodland is not. They in both instances, they do treat water before injecting that water into the ground. There is no known PFAS being injected to the best of my knowledge, though I haven't looked at the exact constituent list that they're looking at the treatment plant. But at this time, there's no known PFAS being injected or removed. This is in the city of Roseville space. This is treated drinking water that is coming through the American River watershed and is being diverted at Folsom Reservoir. So it's a fairly clean and pure water source. And there really is very little likelihood, I would imagine, of PFAS entering into that reservoir just by the nature of how that watershed receives water. So I hope that answers your question.
Barbara Eloy had a question about public comments tonight or when the project is formally proposed. And I think, Ryan, I think you answered that in the chat, but just to remind folks that we're looking for clarifying questions and additional information that would help you as you provide your feedback. But we do want comments on the goal, objectives, principles, and constraints by February 22nd. And there's the slide on the screen tells you exactly how to submit those comments. And the document that's posted on the website also has instructions. And just as a reminder, the goals, objectives, principles, and constraints will be used to help design the overall project.
Can I jump in on that also,
Yes.
Vanessa? So I want to reemphasize that we here at the RWA have an open door policy that if anyone wants to have more information, please give us a call. We have other methods of communicating with the public, not only just the stakeholder forum. I also want to highlight a program that we have, the Water Bank Question of the Week. And we will put some information into the chat where you might be able to find that. But to that point, please reach out to us if you want to learn more about the water bank. If you have specific questions, please do not hesitate to contact us.
Great. There was a question by an anonymous attendee that probably Trevor can answer for us. Who determines if the water bank is in compliance with the GSP?
Yeah, great question. Well, we are going to do a series of modeling and analysis to evaluate and forecast the effects of the water bank. And we also are going to look at the groundwater sustainability plans, both in the North and South American subbasin, to make sure that the operation of the bank does not interfere with the thresholds and creates any unsustainable conditions in both of those banks. So what I'm referring to is obviously a lot of planning and technical analysis work that happens up front to give us confidence that we can move forward and operate the bank, or if we need to change operations to not impact those groundwater basins and make sure that the basins can still operate sustainability. In addition to that, as the bank is implemented, the groundwater sustainability agencies that are the responsibility to implement those groundwater sustainability plans will be part of not only the bank development process, but the implementation process. And we'll have the opportunity to be informed and consulted on water bank operations. So there's going to be a lot of coordination and roles and responsibilities that we haven't really kind of fully vetted yet or worked through that will touch on that relationship in greater detail in the future. But certainly this will be a very transparent process to ensure that we don't run afoul with any sustainable groundwater conditions.
There was a question about whether the slides will be available or published on the website this week. And there's a response in the chat just to remind you all that they're currently posted right now. And there's a link in the chat. So if you want to get the slides or the goal, objectives, principles, and constraints document, those are both available there. There was a comment from Paul Helliker. As you note tonight, And in the goals document, we've been doing water banking for more than a decade via in lieu banking and conjunctive use and via transfers, which are the other side of the recharge recovery equation. Federal acknowledgement will allow current banking to be expanded to allow banking of CDP water outside of the CDP contractor service area. Jim, did you want to address that?
Go ahead, Harold.
Yeah, no, and thank you, Paul. Absolutely, Paul's right, and we briefly showed that three-stage process of bank development. What I didn't spend a lot of time on was, again, that 25-year history on the left, and a lot of that history that really could be a whole presentation in itself in terms of this region's activities over multiple decades to advance conjunctive use to bring the basin into a sustainable condition was kind of just this quickly set aside. So Paul, thanks for that comment, and Paul's absolutely right that conjunctive use activities have been going on for many decades, and the federal acknowledgement will allow banking CBP water outside of CBP's contract service area, and that's one of the reasons we are doing the water bank and getting federally recognition is for that very purpose. So thank you for bringing that up.
Great. Okay, there is a question from Suzanne Fishing. Will all the funding sources of the water bank, both public and private, be made available to the public, including the amount of the investment?
Yeah, great question. And I think the vast majority of agencies in the Regional Water Authority are public agencies, and their information in terms of how they use funding and contribute to different projects and programs is publicly available. We have also received a grant from the Department of Water Resources that provides some money to partially develop some of the water bank project requirements. So we have kind of a series of funding between program that the RW member agencies have provided funding. Again, we've received some grant funding, and we can lay that out in a potentially future presentation. But yes, all of that information is really public to the best of my knowledge.
Thank you, Trevor. There's a question from Gwen Pratt. Are you saying Santa Clara Water as an external agency will have access to the water bank?
They could. At this time, nothing has been really developed. They've expressed interest at this early stage, as other agencies have, as to how the water bank would work, potentially making water available outside of this region. But no agreement has been set. We're not at that stage at all in this project, but external agencies are interested in how it will work.
There's a question from an anonymous attendee. What are the benefits of being a federally recognized water bank?
Yeah, great question. And I think Paul, partially covered that here, or covered it in really federal acknowledgement allows current banking to be expanded, or the banking that we've done utilizing conjunctive use already, and allows banking of Central Valley Project water outside of the Central Valley Project contractors service area. So an external Central Valley Project contractor wanted to bank water within our future federally recognized bank, that would be allowable with federal recognition, I guess, is the way to look at that.
Suzanne Fishy asks, additionally, will shares of the water bank be sold and traded in the U.S. and international markets?
Wow, no, we haven't. No, that will not be. That's not part of that. The banking process. We do like to use the banking analogy, but it doesn't extend that far. This is just an analogy to use to really kind of describe more how we make deposits in terms of recharging surface water into our groundwater basin and the later recovering that water. And the banking analogy is just a great analogy to use, but no, not in the manner that you've described.
Ted Rao has a question. The program seems to be focused on water purveyors. How does the program include, advance, SACRA's concept of stormwater capture or encourage other groundwater users to participate?
Yeah, great question. And the bank does not prohibit. We wanted to be very careful about developing principles and objectives that did not preclude the ability to bank different types of source water and for different uses. And we've have not gone into any additional detail in terms of how that could be done, because at this stage we really just want to make sure we're on clear footing in terms of these goals, objectives, principles, and constraints before we can dive deeper into the actual technical data and information that will identify different sources of water.
There's a question from an anonymous attendee. How are the RWA's expenses covered? Will the formation of this water bank mean additional fees to customers in the RWA area?
You want me to take that?
Yeah, please.
So the RWA is for the most part paid for by water agency dues. There's also what we call a subscription program, which pays for the expenses of developing the water bank. So that's a subset of RWA members that are paying into the development of this water bank, including the preparation of an environmental document, the development of governance, the work that you see going on here tonight. And will it increase cost? Will it increase ratepayer rates? It potentially could, but I would say that probably very modestly and rather insignificantly. This is an opportunity for member agencies and others to be able to store water underground. What I will also say is that in the future, as we experience the challenges of climate change, it's going to be really hard to manage water. And one of the things that we'll want to be able to do is store water in places that are more environmentally benign. And that way, when there is insufficient water supplies, say during a drought or a very, very dry year, we will be able to withdraw that from storage for either serving to customers locally or in some other part of the state, or for some environmental purpose. Thank you.
I'd just like to add, build on what Jim said there, right? Some of this is, what is the alternative cost, right? Jim was referencing this. Is water going to cost less in the future? The answer to that is hard to say, but we know that the water bank is a lower cost alternative based on what we know today, relative to moving forward without the water bank. So will rates go up? I think that's a hard question to answer, but would rates go up less with the water bank present than if they weren't? I think that seems far more certain.
There was a question or a comment from Robert Thomas. This policy paper needs to address conservation, infrastructure and connections, use of existing groundwater wells that can play major roles in this project. Great start, but needs more. Robert, thank you for that feedback, and we're looking forward to hearing more from you on that when you provide feedback and comments on the goal, objectives, principles, and constraints. There was a comment by an anonymous attendee. Surface water moves much faster than groundwater recharge. Have you calculated how the difference between flow rates impacts that actual amount of water that recharges the aquifer during the quote unquote inland period as compared to the amount of surface water used during that period that is credited as groundwater recharge? If those calculations have been made, can you please share them?
Yeah, a very detailed question. Thank you. And there's multiple ways to kind of approach this answer, so bear with me. I'll try to be concise. But when I see a question like this, couple of things come to mind. One is the tools that I mentioned, improving tools. So we do have a surface water flow model. We have a groundwater model. We're investing in making sure that those models are essentially coordinated, if you will, that they can speak to each other and can do analysis to really forecast and project how the water bank operations will affect the groundwater basin and surface water flows. And other users of groundwater and surface water. I also look at a question like this, though, and it kind of brings up some of the accounting that will happen in the future with the bank. And we're fortunate in this region that we have a lot of monitoring wells, so we can really have we do have a strong sense of how the groundwater basin performs to pumping and to in-loop recharge. And we also have infrastructure that has meters, and we can meter and understand the exact amount of groundwater that we're extracting and surface water that we're diverting. So I think this is going to be a great question when we start to get into some of the more technical details in future stakeholder forums. I hope you join us again because we can go through and address this in more detail.
Great, thank you. There's a question from an anonymous attendee. So RWA and water bank dues / fees are sort of being buried in our local rate increases. Isn't this a large enough proposal that it should be voted on by the entire area?
I'm going to say that I don't know the answer to that question. I think that is something that it's going to be important for our member agencies to think about. Typically, they don't have that type of voting structure, but we'll have to wrestle with this question sometime in the future when we develop the governance.
If I could just jump in and add a little bit here. I think it's important for everybody to keep in mind that local agencies their mission is to reliably provide high quality water at the lowest cost. So the reason why an agency would be looking at the water bank is in order to achieve that mission. And again, any sort of rate action that a local agency is going to take is subject to that local jurisdiction and those participating or receiving that service from that local jurisdiction.
Any additional thoughts from the team? Okay, thank you. There is a comment and question from Neil Dabrowski. Surface water has higher dissolved organic carbon concentrations than groundwater, and injecting treated surface water may introduce disinfection byproducts to the aquifer, and it has been demonstrated that they can accumulate over repeated cycles of injection and retrieval. Do you know the concentrations of DBPs are in the groundwater retrieved in the Roseville operation?
Oh boy, Neil, this takes me back. So I used to consult for the city of Roseville, and that's a great question. That was one of the analyses that the Regional Water Quality Control Board really wanted to make sure was well understood before they permitted aquifer storage and recovery more than 20 years ago. And the treatment process really with chlorine, with a chlorine residual left in the water, that's essentially all surface water treatment processes include a chlorine residual, really mitigates the disinfection byproduct kind of, it mitigates essentially any biofouling and allows kind of ASR operations to work smoothly. There are very low concentrations, and I don't remember them off the top of my head, of organics in the aquifer beneath the city of Roseville and predominantly probably beneath much of the basin. And so what we saw is a very slight increase in disinfection byproducts that remain way below the MCL and then dissipated rather quickly after a few weeks or months of ASR operations. So it was deemed at the city of Roseville and by the regulatory community at that time not to be a concern, but we did have to go through quite a bit of analysis to make sure that they did not generate an increase above the MCL. And I'd love to talk to you more about this, and I can, I'm going off memory, but I can bring out some studies and information that gets into this in much more detail, perhaps next time we talk, Neil. Thank you.
But wow, this is one of those great questions that you can really dive into the answers, right? And get into process and treatment and everything on. So maybe that's a good one that can be answered in the question of the week. Okay. There's some more questions and comments that have come in. Ted Rao asks, the banking concept includes strong, verifiable accountability. How do the principals assure a system that is accountable and that will be transparent?
Yeah, good question, Ted. And we want to make sure that that principle is included as we move forward. But you're right, we haven't provided a lot of detail exactly how it's going to happen. And that's where we're at in this project. We just want to make sure that these are the principles, goals, and objectives that we want to move forward with. And we'll provide then some more detail in terms of how that's going to work. And there'll be more context when we actually talk through some of the technical details, and we'll be able to talk specifically about how that accounting is going to work. But our commitment is to make sure that it's transparent, and that's where we're at right now. We just want to make sure that that's covered up front and before we establish the parameters and develop them.
Because as you recall, the goals, objectives, principles, and constraints are there to help design and focus the project, and the details come as the project is developed. So they're good comments.
Thanks for the shorter answer. That's what I wanted to say. Appreciate it.
There are two comments from Paul Helliger. The first is, there seems to be a concern about the financial structure of the water bank. It will be owned and operated by the water agencies in the Sacramento region and will consist of their groundwater pumping operations, augmented by their water purchase and delivery operations. It is not a private corporation.
Yeah, thanks, Paul, for the comment.
And then the second one is, water banking operations are not going to be separate from water agency operations, and any income or expenses associated with the water bank will be included in water agency budgets and associated rates, and will be subject to normal governing body deliberations, including public participation.
Yeah. And again, this helps reinforce that, again, it's the agencies that are going to be operators of the bank. And so appreciate that comment. And that is all the questions and comments that we received through the chat at this point. Does anyone else, please feel free to type in any clarifying questions that would help you provide feedback on the document or any other thoughts that you may have. But at this point, Jim, Trevor, Ryan, that is what's been provided so far in chat.
Does anyone else have any questions? Any comments they'd like to make tonight?
We're already furiously working on the feedback.
The other comments. And I know Jim's already said it, but again, we have an open door policy. You can contact us, separately if you have clarification. You're looking for clarification as you're working on your comments over the next week or so. We'll make ourselves available to the best extent we can to help you inform your comments if you need some more time to kind of work through that.
Well, with that, there are still no new comments and questions posted in the chat. So we're moving fairly quickly through this. Do you want to go to your next slide?
Sounds good. Yes. Yeah, just coming back to the stages again, so you can kind of get a sense of, and I know we have a next step slide as well, but where we're headed next. We have not identified the next stakeholder forum meeting time yet or date. We will likely have it in the spring timeframe this year. But again, we need to kind of make sure that we digest the comments that you provide us on this document and work on and making sure we have some content related to really governance and some updates on improving technical tools. You'll see that during our next stakeholder forum. Next slide. So just to wrap up, and this is a screen capture, I'm sure you can't really see it, but questions of the week. We go through a lot of effort to make sure we're trying to answer these questions as clearly as possible. So again, it's a great source of information. If you just want to kind of track and learn about the bank from week to week, please make sure you look at those questions of the week. Again, comments, we'd really like to have comments no later than February 22nd by 5 p.m. Again, please send them to waterbankinfo@rwah2o.org. We will have a follow-up survey and on this stakeholder forum. So please participate in that survey. It helps us improve this process and make sure we're providing applicable and timely content. And we do really thank you for your involvement. We can't do the water bank without your input. And we mean this truly. It's very important that we get input so that we develop a program and a bank that is really as strong and complete as we need to increase water supply reliability for our region. And I think we'll stop there.
Okay, there was one comment in the chat box from an anonymous attendee that said, "Thank you for the session this evening. Thank you for sharing the questions, quick links to the documents, and responses to all the questions posted." And Brett Ebert also added a comment offering my compliments to the Water Bank development team and to the public participants with questions that ultimately lead to a more successful outcome. Thank you. Jim, would you like to close with anything?
I want to thank everyone for participating tonight in this stakeholder forum. Stay tuned. We will have, as Trevor said, additional stakeholder forums going forward. Thank you.